Hi, this is Josh Kulp for Daf Shevui. We are learning Daf Yod Aleph of Masechet Kiddushin. I hope that by the time that you watch this, those of you who are in the Midwest, you have not turned into human popsicles with our polar vortex. I am safely warm in southern New Jersey. Not so bad here, but I'm teaching on the road for this next couple weeks. So I wanted to talk about the statement that the Gemara focuses on this daf, large portions of this daf, and that is Rav Asi's statement that anytime there is money that is derived from the Torah or is mentioned in the Torah, a kesef that comes from the Torah, it's valued at the Tyrian standard, and anytime that there is any amount that's fixed by the rabbis, it's determined by the rabbis, it's in the lower standard of what they call kesef Medina, the regional standard. Now, I wanted to take a step back and talk about how difficult it is to figure out the value of money in the time of the Talmud. This is something I get asked a lot. How much was 200 zuz worth? Right? We know that 200 zuz, 200 dinar is the value of a ketubah. How much money was that? This is a very, very difficult question. We should know that, like, even if you don't have a way to look it up in the internet, if you say, like, oh, this cost $5,000 in 1962, so even today with good records, sometimes it's hard to figure how much $5,000 was worth in 1962 or $200, doesn't matter what the amount is. But this is 10 times, if not 100 times harder when it comes in the time of the Talmud. And I want to give you some of the reasons why. So first of all, the Talmud is a composite document that was written with traditions spanning, 500 years, roughly speaking, from both Palestine, Eretz Israel, and Babylonia. And imagine, if I were to say, in 1,000 years, how much did a loaf of bread cost in America? Well, when? It could be 10 times higher. It can fluctuate radically from one place to another. So it's very, very difficult to figure something out from the Talmud because the Talmud is such a document that covers two major regions and covers such a wide time span, and it has a tendency to continue to illustrate things with the same amount that was used in ancient literature. So if an Amora talks about something being worth 4 dinar or 2 dinar or whatever the amount is, well, the next generation is going to continue to talk about something worth the same amount, even though there's no reason to assume that the amount hasn't changed. Now, that's somewhat problem is somewhat alleviated if you have a case law. So-and-so bought something for such and such amount of money, then you can sometimes assume that if you can figure out when that case actually took place, that maybe it's an accurate reflection. And I would say maybe because we know that some of these things are theoretical. And that's another problem with the Talmud. A lot of the discussions are highly theoretical. And there's this power of tradition. If something it has a certain value, we don't change it. The easiest example of that is the ketubah. The ketubah was set at a certain time to be 200 zuz, and that number certainly reflects a number that comes from the Torah. The Torah says that a rapist or a seducer has to pay a fine of 50 shekels. The rabbis say that a shekel is worth 4 zuz. So 200 zuz becomes the value of a ketubah. That number wasn't picked because it's a high number or a low number. That number was picked because the rabbis believe that it reflects the amount of in the Torah. So it's very, very difficult. If you're really interested in these matters, Daniel Sperber wrote a book on money in the Talmudic period. It's not a particularly exciting book, but he goes through all sorts of issues related to money, the physicality of it, the size of coins, the names of coins, the distribution of coins, what types of coins, etc., throughout the Talmudic period. So coming back to our issue, this issue of two standards, a Tyrian standard and a lower standard, there is some, from what I remember of Sperber's book, which I haven't read in really, to be honest with you, 20 years, there is some reflection of reality in the fact that there was a higher silver standard that was set in one place and that was used throughout the Roman Empire, and a lower standard that would reflect regional usage. There is some reality in what Rav Asi says. The problem is trying to figure out exactly the relationship between the Tyrian standard and the local standard. Probably in reality varied from place to place, but it became standardized in rabbinic literature to be 1/8. So we do find ketubot in the Gaonic period, roughly speaking from the year 1000. We do find ketubot that instead of having the number 200, it has the number 25, 1/8 of 200. And we do even find in the Gemara one reference that will come up later in the Masechet of a ketubah that's worth 25 as opposed to 200, under the assumption that a ketubah amount is d'Rabbanan, is from the rabbis and is not from the Torah. So there is some reality in this. It could be that 200 zuz in places where inflation was very high became a large amount and was difficult for people to afford. So it could be that there was an attempt to lower the ketubah to 25 silver dinar as opposed to 200. But again, this is going to change a lot from place to place. So keep that in mind when you're learning about Talmudic amounts of money. It's an interesting question to think about, but it is exceedingly difficult to answer it from the nature of Talmudic literature.